My name is Ethan, I'm 30 years old, and I'm a lawyer. I have an exceptionally happy and traditional family. My father is a retired judge, and my mother is a university literature professor. There's also a younger sister 2 years my junior, Luna, who currently works as a senior executive assistant at a multinational corporation. Oh, and there's my 85-year-old grandfather, robust in health but with ruthlessly brutal ways of pushing for marriage. Our family could be described as a textbook, reasonable household, but the moment the topic turned to my lifelong affairs, all logic and principle would instantly fail, replaced by the sound of Grandpa's cane striking the floor and my mother's sighs. In many people's eyes, the profession of lawyer implies cool-headedness, rationality, even a certain heartlessness. But in fact, lawyers are human too, especially when you've just won a hard-fought battle that lasted half a year and involved disputes over assets worth hundreds of millions. Even the steeliest reason can be reduced to dust under the catalyst of alcohol. Ethan. We're not going home sober tonight. Ethan, this drink's on me. Your line in court today, the opposing counsel's grasp of the law is still in the prenatal education stage, was absolutely epic. Amid the raucous cheering from my colleagues at the firm, I accepted every offer, downing whiskey cup after cup. The last thing I remember is my assistant Wesley's face, written all over with anxiety. He was struggling to support me while muttering, "Ethan, slow down. I'll take you to your hotel room to rest, just don't puke in my car, I just washed it this morning." When I opened my eyes again, everything was dim. It felt like a power drill was gnawing at my temples and my stomach was turning over like a tidal wave. But what I could least ignore was the overwhelming urge to urinate rising from my lower abdomen. It was the most primitive, most irresistible of human bodily summons. I struggled out of the soft bed, too careless even to put on shoes, closed my eyes and groped my way to the bathroom by instinct. Just as I was letting go and savoring that rare ease after a hangover, a rapid, heavy knocking suddenly came from outside. It wasn't a polite knock, it sounded more like someone desperately battering the door with their body or a heavy object. I frowned. Could it be that Wesley had left something behind? Or one of the hotel staff? Rubbing my temples, I walked to the door. The hangover dulled my reflexes by half a beat. I didn't even check the peephole, I simply reached out and twisted the knob. Before I could finish, a hot, pliant body lunged into my arms without warning. Hell, help me. A dense, strange sweetness of expensive perfume tangled with alcohol flooded my nose. It was a woman. Her whole body sagged against my chest as if she had no bones, her temperature alarmingly high. Through the thin fabric I could clearly feel her rapid, burning heartbeat. "Hey, miss, did you take the wrong room?" The last of my reason tried to push her away. As a lawyer, my professional instinct warned me this was dangerous. I reflexively wanted to shove her off, but under the influence of alcohol my limbs felt weak. "If you need help, I can call the front desk," or, before I could finish, she suddenly lifted her head. It was an extraordinarily beautiful face, flushed all over, eyes glazed and unfocused, lips slightly parted, breaths ragged and fast. She seemed to have lost her senses, merely instinctively searching for a cool support. "It's so hot, help me," she murmured, then suddenly threw her arms around my neck and clung to it. The next second, a warm kiss, trembling slightly and smelling sweet, came crashing down and sealed my lips. With a boom. The taut strand of reason in my mind snapped completely in that instant. Alcohol, the late hour, a beautiful woman throwing herself into my arms, and the astonishing heat radiating from her that seemed ready to melt a person, like a wildfire, it ignited the beast sleeping inside me. Already groggy from the hangover, in that moment every law, professional ethic, and gentlemanly restraint was overwhelmed by instinct. "Damn," I muttered, shut the door behind me with a flick of my hand, swept her tightly into my arms, and, taking the initiative, kissed her. That night there was no light in the room, only mottled neon seeping in through the window, and a chamber full of dizzying, heart-racing chaos and frenzy. The next midday I was roused by blinding sunlight. The aftermath of the hangover made my head throb as if it would split, and the ache all over my body reminded me that what happened last night was by no means a mere spring dream. I shot my eyes open and turned toward the other side of the bed. The covers were in disarray, a faint sweet scent still hung in the air, but the woman who had lain there was gone. On the sheets, a smear of glaring dark red silently proclaimed that last night's madness was not a hallucination. Damn it, what did I do? I punched the pillow in frustration. As a lawyer, I knew all too well the legal gray areas of such matters, and I despised myself for losing control under the influence of alcohol last night. I quickly dressed and went downstairs to the hotel front desk. Hello, I'm a guest in room 1808. Last night, did anyone register entering my room? Or do you have surveillance footage that could show who went into my room last night? The front desk attendant smiled politely. Sir, I'm sorry, but we must protect our guests' privacy. Besides, without authorization from the police, we can't access surveillance footage or guest registration information on our own. I took a deep breath and produced my business card. I'm Ethan, a partner at Hangjing Law Firm. I may have lost an important document last night and suspect it's connected to the person who entered my room. I only need to confirm her identity. I won't make things difficult for you. The receptionist looked uncomfortable, tapped a few keys on the computer, then frowned in surprise. Mr. Ethan, I'm really sorry. Late last night our hotel's security system suffered a brief network failure. Some of the surveillance recordings were damaged or lost. Our technicians are currently repairing it. Right now we can't find anything. Damaged? What a coincidence. Since she chose to leave without a sound, it meant she didn't want any further entanglement with me. As an adult, the best way to handle it was to act as if it never happened. Forget it, thanks. I rubbed my temples and turned to leave the hotel. I thought perhaps this was just one of the countless absurd nights in a big city. Maybe she really had just had too much to drink, or maybe she had opened the wrong door. Two people, at the wrong time and the wrong place, had an accidental crossing. Since she chose to leave with Milo, perhaps she didn't want any involvement with me. Then, let it be a traceless one-night stand. Days passed like that, one after another. Time is the best medicine for forgetting worries, and in the blink of an eye, 3 years had gone by. In those 3 years my career flourished. I became a well-known top lawyer in the industry. But with that success came tremendous pressure at home. I'm 30 this year. At the dinner table my mother began her usual nagging again. Ethan, you're not a kid anymore, it's time to settle down. Look at Auntie Wang's son next door, he's 2 years younger than you and already has 2 kids. My father pushed up his glasses and agreed from beside her, no matter how busy you are, family is your rear guard. At 30 you should be standing on your own, it's time to stabilize. Grandfather, sitting in his wheelchair beside me, also spoke in a trembling voice, a note of heartbreaking hope in it. Ethan. Grandpa's body is getting worse by the day. My greatest wish in this life is to see you married, settled, and with children before I close my eyes. Looking at Grandpa's silver hair and those expectant eyes, the refusal stuck in my throat. I couldn't say it no matter how I tried. I'm a filial person, and I do think 30 is indeed an age to settle down. So I compromised and began to accept the blind dates my family arranged. But for some reason, among those matches were socialites, returnees from abroad, and cultured female teachers, each with excellent qualifications. Yet whenever I sat and talked with them, my heart felt like still water, even tinged with a vague sense of aversion. Sometimes in the dead of night that chaotic evening from 3 years ago flashes through my mind. A woman whose face I couldn't make out, but whose touch my body remembers vividly. Bro, stop picky ing, if you keep this up you'll turn into the golden leftover fighter. My younger sister Luna, 2 years my junior, was sitting on the couch munching an apple. She's lively by nature. After graduating college she went to work as an executive assistant at a large multinational, so busy these days she's barely ever around. Mind your own business, your own life isn't even settled, yet you're meddling in mine. I gave her a sharp knock with no patience. That's called building a career. Our CEO is a super career woman, follow her and my future is limitless. Luna said proudly, tilting her chin. I shook my head helplessly and continued leafing through the thick stack of blind date profiles in my hands, sighing. Where, exactly, was my fate? The turning point came a month later at a charitable business dinner. As the law firm's legal counsel, I was invited to attend. For me, These events were nothing more than a different place to hand out business cards, dull and tedious. I was standing in a corner with a glass of champagne, watching the insincere, polite crowd on the dance floor with boredom. Suddenly, a familiar figure pushed into my line of sight. Luna. I saw Luna dressed today in an unusually formal professional outfit, wearing high heels and trailing closely, step for step, behind a woman. The woman wore a simple yet noble deep blue haute couture gown, her black hair swept up to reveal a swan-like graceful neck. Her figure was tall, her aura cool and aristocratic, like an ink lotus quietly blooming amid the crowd. I walked over to them and called softly, "Luna." Luna heard the voice, turned her head, and when she saw me her eyes immediately lit up. "Brother. What are you doing here?" "I'm the legal counsel for the organizer, just came to join the fun," I said with a smile, then politely turned to the woman beside her. "This must be the CEO you're always talking about." Luna hurried to introduce, Yes. "Bro, this is my direct boss, the CEO of Shen Group, Miss Stella." "President, this is my real brother, Ethan, he's a lawyer." I kept my perfect social smile and reached out my hand to Stella. "Miss Stella, hello, I've heard much about you. Luna told me you take good care of her at work, thank you very much." However, to my surprise, Stella didn't immediately return the gesture. She stood frozen as if under a paralysis spell, rigid in place. Those eyes, originally cool and calm, set off a storm of turbulence the moment they fell on me. Her complexion, under the bright light, went a little pale in an instant, and her breathing noticeably quickened. She stared at me intently, her gaze sweeping repeatedly over my eyebrows, nose bridge, even my thin lips. "Boss. Are you okay?" Luna asked, tugging at her sleeve with a puzzled look. Stella snapped back to herself. She fought to suppress the horror in her eyes, hastily reaching out, her fingertips were cold, even carrying a barely perceptible tremor. "Hello, Mr. Ethan." Her voice was a little hoarse, but she still strained to maintain the poise of a CEO. "Miss Stella, are you feeling unwell? You look a bit pale." I asked with concern. For some reason, looking at that face, something deep inside me seemed to be tugged gently. There was a strange, inexplicable sense of familiarity. But I scoured my memory and was certain I had never had any interaction with this high and mighty CEO before. It's nothing, maybe the hall is a bit stuffy." Stella took a deep breath and forced a smile, but her gaze never left my face. To be precise, she was staring into my eyes. At this moment Stella's heart was already in turmoil. She looked at the handsome, mature man before her, with a trace of elite roguishness, and in her mind another youthful little face kept overlapping with his. Her son, Milo, just over 2. Those eyebrows and eyes, and the way his thin lips habitually pressed together slightly when he thought, looking a little stubborn. Good heavens, they were identical. The nightmare from 3 years ago, and the man who had left her full of hate and powerless, whose name she didn't even know, had in this absurd moment appeared before her. And on top of that, he was the elder brother of Luna, the assistant she trusted most. Stella forced herself to stay calm. She looked into my face, so composed, so unremarkable, even tinged with a hint of puzzlement, and quickly realized something: this man did not remember her. No wonder. That night 3 years ago the room had been dark. Besides, he had been plastered, and the next morning he had fled at dawn nursing his body's pain and his wounded pride. In that state of a hangover, it would be a miracle if he remembered what she looked like. Stella's hand, hidden beneath the hem of her gown, clenched so hard her nails cut into her palm. She smiled, though the depths of her eyes hid a complex, unfathomable abyss. "Mr. Ethan, you're remarkably young and successful. In the future, there will be many opportunities, we can keep in touch. It is my honor," I replied with a smile, completely unaware that I had already become someone's person of interest. After the dinner ended, Stella collapsed wearily onto the sofa as soon as she returned to her empty villa. "Mom." A soft, milky voice called, and the little one came waddling on short legs, stumbling into her arms. Stella's heart melted in an instant. She scooped up her son, her eyes growing a little hot. She looked at her son's face, with features similar to Ethan's, and the memories she had deliberately sealed away 3 years ago surged up like a tide. 3 years ago, she was still the rightful heir of the Shen family, but she was betrayed by her father's illegitimate daughter, Faye. Faye had always resented that, being a daughter of the same father, why could Stella have everything while she could only be an ignoble mistress, kept in the shadows? At that hotel's business banquet, Faye colluded with outsiders and slipped a powerful aphrodisiac into Stella's wine, intending to get some thugs to destroy her chastity, record it on video, and completely dethrone her. After the herbal medicine took effect, Stella sensed something was wrong. She fought desperately, threw off her pursuers, and fled into the hotel's guest room corridor. At the moment the drug fully kicked in and her mind teetered on the brink of collapse, she slammed with all her might on the nearest door, then lost consciousness completely. When she woke again, all that remained was the absurd, throbbing aftertaste of that night. Stella wasn't a coward. The next day she immediately demanded the hotel footage, only to be told that the surveillance and check-in systems on the 18th floor had been hacked that night and all data permanently destroyed, irretrievable. She once believed it was that man, who had stumbled into her life by accident and then cowardly fled, who had erased every trace, and her current situation left her little energy to probe into that absurd mishap. Silently leaving the hotel, she soon discovered she was pregnant. Facing family pressure and outside gossip, she withstood it all and gave birth to the child. For he was her own flesh and blood, her only solace in that cold family. "Milo, tell mommy, do you want a daddy?" Stella gently stroked her son's hair, her voice trembling slightly. Little over 2-year-old Milo tilted his head, blinking those eyes like Ethan's, and in a babyish voice said, "I want a daddy, other kids have daddies to hold them." Stella closed her eyes as 2 clear tears slid down her face. The next morning, Stella sat in the CEO's office, massaging her temples, and pressed the intercom. "Luna, come in for a moment." Luna walked in holding a folder. "CEO, what can I do for you?" Stella did her best to adopt a casual, chatty tone. "Luna, I heard from your brother yesterday that he's a lawyer. He must be pretty busy with work, right? Is he married?" The moment Luna heard that, she immediately perked up and launched into a tirade. "Oh, don't even get me started. My brother's 30 this year, solidly single. My parents and my grandfather hound him about blind dates every day, and he's so picky he can't get along with anyone. My grandfather's biggest wish now is to see him married with children before he dies, and my brother's about to be driven insane. Single, 30, family pressuring him to marry every day." Stella felt her heart suddenly race. Was he single 3 years ago too? Stella asked, feigning casualness. "Yeah, he's been single for years. 3 years ago he'd just been promoted to partner and was spinning like a top with work, no time for a relationship." Luna sighed. Stella's hand, hidden beneath the desk, trembled slightly. The pieces of information all matched. To be 100% sure, Stella decided to dig deeper. She called in every contact she had in the technical team from the Shen Group, even paying handsomely for top white hat hackers to retrace the traces of the hotel system breach from 3 years ago. The net of justice is wide and sparse, and oversights are inevitable. 3 days later, the technicians handed in a top-secret report. "Miss Stella, we traced the hacker IP that deleted the hotel footage 3 years ago. Although the perpetrator used multiple hops, the final remittance account for the funds points to Miss Faye's overseas-related account." Stella looked at the name on the report, a razor-cold flash cutting through her eyes. So it wasn't that man who had erased all the traces back then, it was Faye. Faye, afraid the truth would come out, afraid her act of drugging someone would be discovered by her father, had rushed to hire a hacker to wipe all evidence from the 18th floor that night. And that had also misled Stella, causing her to keep seeing that innocent man as someone who deliberately shirked responsibility, a callous deserter who abandoned his obligations. Now the truth was laid bare. The man hadn't fled, he had been drunk. He didn't even know what, if anything, he had done to whom. "Ethan," Stella murmured the name, a complicated curve tugging at the corner of her mouth. Having identified her target, Stella suddenly hesitated. Should she confront him outright? Should she simply say, "Ethan, the person who assaulted you 3 years ago, no, the one who slept with you was me, and I even gave birth to a son who's just over 2. Stella shook her head, That kind of melodramatic line belongs in a soap opera and was entirely out of character for her. Besides, what if Ethan was extreme or unscrupulous, if he learned the truth and used his legal expertise to fight for custody, forcing her and Milo into endless turmoil? She had to observe and assess this man herself. Just as Stella was pondering how to cross paths with Ethan without it seeming deliberate, a sudden accident upended all her plans. That afternoon, Stella was in the office checking reports with Luna. Luna's phone suddenly began to ring loudly. She glanced at the caller ID, her expression changed, and she hurried to answer. "Hello, Grandpa. What's wrong?" On the other end came the frail, pained voice of the elder, along with the chaotic sounds of something heavy hitting the floor and a dog barking. "Luna, I was taking medicine in the living room just now and accidentally fell. I can't get up." "What?" "Grandpa, don't rush, don't move. Where are my parents?" Luna's eyes instantly reddened, her voice catching with sobs. "Your parents went to your cousin's wedding banquet and won't be back today. Ethan is on a business trip." "Luna, I'm feeling very unwell right now, I don't seem to be able to move." "Ethan's on a trip? Why of all times now?" Luna fretted like an ant on a hot pan, tears plopping down. Stella, standing nearby, had heard everything clearly. Without the slightest hesitation, she sprang up and grabbed the distraught, panicking Luna. "Don't panic. Call 911 now and tell them the address. My car's downstairs, I'll drive you there, hurry." Stella's calm, decisive voice was like a spring of clear water, instantly giving Luna something to cling to. "President, thank you, thank you." Stella personally drove her black Maybach, weaving and overtaking expertly on the afternoon roads. What should have been a 40-minute drive she forced down to 20. On the road, Stella kept one hand on the wheel while calmly directing Luna, "Keep calling the emergency center to confirm their location. Also, contact your neighborhood property management and have them send security to the house to see if the door can be opened and to check your grandfather's injuries." "Okay, okay." Luna dialed the property office with trembling hands. By the time they arrived at the townhouse in the suburbs, the property security had already used a spare key to get inside. Grandfather was lying on the living room carpet, his face pale with pain, but thankfully he was still somewhat conscious. A few minutes later, the ambulance arrived wailing its siren. Stella helped the medical staff carefully lift Grandfather onto a stretcher. Then she drove Luna, tailing the ambulance all the way to the First People's Hospital of the city. Registration, payment, escorted into the examination room. Luna was so frantic she could hardly think, while Stella stayed with her the whole time, dashing back and forth with various forms. Half an hour later, the doctor came out of the examination room. "You family members don't need to worry too much. The elder only has a minor soft tissue contusion, no fractures. Mainly due to age, he was startled by the fall and his blood pressure is a bit high. We'll observe him in the hospital overnight and give him some fluids, he should be fine." "Thank you, doctor." "Thank you, doctor." Luna's legs went weak, she collapsed into a chair and burst into tears, covering her face. Stella finally let out a breath, patted Luna's shoulder, and gently comforted her. "It's okay now, don't cry, it was a scare but nothing serious." Just then, hurried, chaotic footsteps suddenly sounded from the end of the corridor. "Luna. How's Grandpa?" The voice arrived before the person did. I barreled into the corridor, windblown and dust-streaked. I had been on a business trip in a neighboring city, but the moment I received Luna's call I was terrified, so shaken that I couldn't even finish signing the contract. I sped back the whole way, driving like mad for 2 hours. "Brother." Luna saw me and, as if spotting a savior, threw herself into my arms, sobbing about the recent scare. While I comforted my sister, I looked up and unexpectedly saw the woman standing to the side, somewhat disheveled yet still bearing an air of elegance. Her once perfect black hair was a bit tousled, and one of the earrings on one side was missing. "Stella." I was completely stunned. Luna lifted her head from my arms, sobbing, and said, "Brother, it's all thanks to Stella. If Stella hadn't driven me back, helped contact the doctor and handle the payments, I don't know what I would have done." I looked at Stella, overwhelmed with shock and gratitude. A lofty conglomerate president, of all people, had humbled herself, running errands and bending over backwards for her assistant's family matter. In that moment, watching her face flushed from running around and those eyes that glittered under the fluorescent lights, something in a corner of my heart seemed to be quietly melting. Miss Stella, thank you. Really, I don't know how to thank you. I stepped forward and thanked her sincerely and solemnly. Stella started slightly, then politely tucked a stray lock behind her ear and smiled faintly. You're being polite. Luna is my capable assistant, her family is my family. This is something I should do. I watched her reddened eyes and slightly weary expression, feeling a small stir in my chest. Unconsciously I softened my voice. Stella, you've really worked hard today. Leave the rest to me, I'll take you home to rest, okay? No need, I drove here. She shook her head gently and said goodbye. Watching her walk away, my heart inexplicably skipped a beat. In that instant, her guard lowered, gentle and tired, and she looked so much like the girl from that chaotic, out-of-control night 3 years ago, the one who had murmured unconsciously in my arms. A crazy, even somewhat absurd idea flashed through my mind, and I immediately pressed it down with a self-mocking thought. I must be out of my mind. She's the one who runs the Shin Corporation. How could she possibly be the same girl who was in such a miserable state at the hotel that night? I took a deep breath and forcibly pushed that ridiculous notion aside. While Grandpa was in the hospital, my parents hurried back from out of town. When they learned that Stella had helped all the way through, they clasped her hands and thanked her with tears in their eyes. Stella looked both amused and embarrassed, but she handled it politely. To show our gratitude, on the 3rd day after Grandpa was discharged, I formally invited Stella. Stella, are you free tonight? I'd like to take you to dinner to formally express my family's thanks. Please do us the honor. Stella was silent on the other end for a moment, then agreed. The dinner was booked at an upscale private restaurant known for being extremely quiet and intimate. At the table, besides Stella and me, Luna shamelessly tagged along, claiming she wanted to liven up the atmosphere. I lifted my glass and, looking at Stella who had once again become refined and elegant tonight, said sincerely, Stella, here's to you. It's all thanks to you that my grandfather was discharged today, he's in excellent spirits. Stella lifted her teacup and smiled lightly, you're too polite, I don't drink alcohol, tea will do. Understood, understood. I smiled and drank it all in one go. At the dinner table, the atmosphere was a little delicate. Luna was the lively one, never stopping her chatter and jokes, recounting stories about the law firm and all the embarrassing things from my childhood. My brother was such a character when he was little. Once he set our neighbor's chicken free and Dad chased him down 3 blocks. Luna, shut up and eat your meat. My face flushed, and I gave her an awkward glare. Stella listened beside me, the corners of her mouth lifting into an extraordinarily gentle, almost tender smile. She looked at me and imagined what a mischievous 2-year-old Milo might be like. Would he be like me when I was little? Halfway through the meal, Luna suddenly stood up. Oh, I'm going to the restroom, you guys keep talking. After Luna left, the private room fell silent. My phone happened to vibrate at that moment. I apologized to Stella, sorry, I need to take a work call. It might take a few minutes. I pointed apologetically at my phone. Stella smiled and said, it's okay, go ahead. I picked up my phone and walked outside. The moment the private room door closed, the smile on Stella's face vanished. Her heartbeat quickened and her palms grew slightly sweaty. She looked at the empty private room, at the suit jacket thrown over the back of my chair, and then at the cup on my table that had just been used for water. An extremely bold, even somewhat scandalous idea began to breed wildly in her mind. Milo's brows and eyes, they're so much like his. Luna said he's been single all these years, if he really is that person. Stella inhaled deeply, almost instinctively stood up, and hurried over to my suit jacket. She looked around nervously, then, at the collar of my suit, she very luckily found a slightly stiff short hair. It was clearly mine. She quickly pulled a clean wet wipe from her bag, carefully pinched up that strand of hair, and wrapped it away. Then she walked over to my seat, picked up the cup I'd used. There were traces of my saliva along the rim. She took another wet wipe and wiped the mouth of the cup carefully, then tucked it into her bag as well. Having done all that, she sat back down like someone who'd just committed a theft, one hand pressed over her pounding heart. A few minutes later I finished the call and pushed the door open. "Sorry to keep you waiting." I smiled as I sat down. Stella forced herself to appear normal, lifted her teacup and took a sip. "It's fine." I keenly noticed that her face seemed a little flushed, and her gaze was a bit unfocused, avoiding meeting mine. I asked, a little puzzled, "Stella, are you feeling unwell?" No, this dish is a bit spicy." She hastily grabbed a napkin to dab at the corner of her mouth. I glanced at the few dishes on the table, so bland they verged on nothingness, and felt a faint puzzlement, but I didn't dwell on it. After the meal, I saw Stella to her car. Watching her car vanish into the night, Stella sat in the back seat, clutching her handbag so hard her knuckles were white. "Go to the forensic center," she ordered the driver coldly. She couldn't wait another moment. 3 days later. Stella canceled all her afternoon meetings and sat alone in her office. On her desk lay a sealed brown paper bag. She looked at the paper bag, feeling as if even breathing had become difficult. 3 years of an unresolved case, countless nights of struggle and humiliation, and the mystery of her son's origins, all the answers were in that bag. She tore open the seal with trembling hands, pulled out the documents, and flipped straight to the last page. She couldn't make sense of the complex column of genetic data. Her gaze was fixed on the final line in bold. "According to DNA test results, evidence supports Ethan as Milo's biological father, probability of parentage 99.99%. Plop. The test report fell onto the table. Stella collapsed into her chair, and tears sprang from her eyes without warning. It was really him. It really was him. The man who had given her a gasp of relief in her despair, a breath in the dark, and then vanished without a trace the next day, leaving her with 3 years of being called pregnant before marriage, turns out to really be Ethan. And at that moment I was sitting in the law office going through files when I suddenly sneezed several times in a row. "Who's insulting me?" I rubbed my nose, feeling a bit baffled. In the days that followed, Stella was in a state of utter turmoil. She watched Milo playing happily in the living room, the little guy clutching an Ultraman toy, muttering, "Daddy, Daddy fights the monsters." "Milo," Stella crouched down and, with a twinge of heartache, wrapped her arms around her son. Milo was 2.5 this year and was already starting to understand things. At the early education class, seeing other children being picked up by their fathers, Milo didn't say anything, but the disappointment and envy in his eyes were impossible to hide. She could do without a husband, she could remain unmarried for the rest of her life, but what about Milo? Milo was innocent. What right did he have to grow up in an environment distorted by a lack of paternal love? Moreover, from the conversations with Luna over these past days and her own observations, Ethan was a man with a strong sense of responsibility, kindness, and an extremely clean private life. He too had been a victim back then. He knew nothing about any of this. Stella took a deep breath and finally made her decision. That afternoon, I was in a meeting at the firm when Wesley suddenly knocked and walked in, looking rather odd. "Ethan, Stella from the Shin Group is here to see you. She says, it's an extremely important personal matter and she must see you now." "Stella." I was taken aback for a moment, then told the associates in the meeting, "Pause for 10 minutes." I stepped out of the conference room and went to the reception area. Today Stella was wearing a black suit, looking particularly striking and severe. She held a folder in her hand and sat quietly on the sofa. "Stella, what brings you by today? Did Luna mess up at the company?" I said with a smile as I sat down. Stella looked up at me, and in those cold, clear eyes there flickered a complexity I couldn't read, an emotion that even made me a little uneasy. "Ethan, I'm here today not on business, but on personal matters." Her voice was unnervingly calm to the point of being frightening. "Personal matters?" "Go on," I said, feeling a touch puzzled. Stella didn't waste words, she pushed the brown paper bag in her hand straight toward me. "Look at this first." I looked at her suspiciously, reached out, tore open the bag, and took out the documents inside. When I saw the bold words, paternity test report, I almost laughed. Stella, what do you mean by this? Whose paternity test? My voice cut off abruptly. Because in the column labeled, Client Test Subject A, my own name was glaring back at me, Ethan. And in the column labeled, Identified Person B, was a strange name, Milo. My gaze trembled downward and finally froze on that red official seal, and the conclusion supports that Ethan is Milo's biological father. Boom. In that instant my brain completely lost its ability to think, as if 100,000 thunderclaps were exploding in my ears at once. This can't be. This is absolutely a prank. I jumped to my feet, and because of the force the chair scraped harshly across the floor. Stella, are you kidding? I'm not even married, I don't have a girlfriend, where would I possibly have a 2-year-old son? This report is fake, right? I growled, losing control. As a lawyer, it was the first time in my life I felt so absurd and furious in the face of evidence. Stella, however, watched me with an unusual calm. Stella, you're a professional lawyer, you should know how authoritative that forensic center is. Besides, you can always run it through your own channels again, I'll cooperate anytime. She paused, her eyes complex as they fixed on me. Then, speaking slowly and deliberately, she said, do you remember that summer night 3 years ago, in 2023, in room 1808 of the Hyatt, the night you were drunk? Hyatt Hotel, room 1808, a hangover. Those words were like a key, instantly opening that forbidden door in my mind that had been sealed for 3 years. That chaotic, warm night, laced with sweetness and pain. I felt struck by lightning, staring fixedly at Stella's cool, beautiful face. 3 years ago, the woman who had kissed me first. Why, you. My voice trembled, my pupils contracting sharply. It was me. Stella took a deep breath, her eyes a little red. That night was an accident. I'd been drugged, and you'd drunk too much. I left the next day, and later I found out I was pregnant. I gave birth to this child, his name is Milo. He's 2.5 years old. My legs went weak and I sank back onto the sofa, limp. For 3 years I had convinced myself it was nothing more than a ridiculous one-night stand. I never imagined that somewhere in the world there could be a child carrying my blood who had quietly grown to 2.5 years old. And that child's mother turned out to be the lofty president of the Shin Corporation. The reception room fell into a deathly silence. I stared fixedly at the report, reason and emotion in my mind tearing and colliding with one another. As a 30-year-old mature man, a lawyer known for his rationality, I forced myself to calm down. I looked at Stella. Though she seemed outwardly icy, the slight tremor in her hands resting on her knees betrayed the nervousness and fragility in her heart. For the past 3 years, she alone bore the title of heir to the Shin family, endured all the rumors and gossip outside, carried a pregnancy, bore a child, and cared for the baby by herself. How much pain and pressure did she endure? And I, the nominal father, was in the law firm drinking coffee, arguing cases, even picky about blind dates arranged by the family. A fierce wave of guilt and self-reproach instantly overwhelmed me. I took a deep breath, looked at Stella, and spoke sincerely, my voice rough. I'm sorry, Stella. I'm truly sorry. Stella froze for a moment. She had prepared herself to meet my doubts, my anger, even a bargaining over interests, but she had never expected that the first words out of my mouth would be such a sincere apology. I rubbed my face painfully and said, I'm sorry for losing control back then, and for being absent these past 3 years. Leaving you to face all of this alone, I really am sorry. At hearing that, Stella's taut body suddenly sagged. That hard protective shell seemed to have been gently punctured by my words. Her eyes instantly reddened, but she stubbornly wiped at the corners and gave a self-mocking laugh. Ethan, given the circumstances at the time, you were drunk, I was drugged, no one was to blame. It was just an accident. No, the child is the greatest victim. I looked at her, my expression unusually serious. He was born without a father's love, raised in an incomplete family, this is my failing. Stella looked at me, a flicker of emotion crossed her eyes. The man's reaction completely exceeded her expectations. He didn't shirk responsibility, didn't panic, nor did he seize the moment to climb socially. In his eyes there was only guilt and self-reproach for the child. Luna was right, he truly was a kind, responsible man. "So, what do you plan to do?" Stella asked, a faint hope stirring in her heart that even she hadn't noticed. I gathered my thoughts and spoke calmly. "Stella, we are both adults, and we are both rational people. Although we have a child, there is no emotional foundation between us. If we force ourselves to be together now, or get married for the child's sake, it would be irresponsible toward you, me, and the child." Stella nodded in agreement. "I think the same. Milo is my son, and I'm not giving him to you." I said sincerely, "I understand. I don't need you to give me the child, but I hope to fulfill my responsibilities as a father. We don't need to change the course of our lives, but I want to co-parent him, to let him know he has a dad, and that his dad loves him very much." Stella looked at me and finally showed the first genuine smile she had given in days. "Okay, it's a deal." We reached a verbal, co-parenting agreement. And I finally had the first meeting with my son who had appeared out of nowhere. The appointment was on a weekend afternoon, at Stella's villa. The night before I left, I was so nervous I couldn't sleep a wink. I, a top lawyer who can speak eloquently in court and remain unflappable facing lawsuits worth hundreds of millions, was so anxious about meeting a 2.5-year-old that my palms sweated and I didn't know what to wear. I even frantically searched online, what gift should you bring when meeting your 2.5-year-old son for the first time? Do 2.5-year-olds prefer Ultraman or Peppa Pig? At last, I carried a trunk full of toys and snacks, my heart almost pounding out of my throat, and pressed the doorbell at Stella's. Stella opened the door. She was dressed in casual loungewear today, looking less sharp than she did in the mall and wearing a softness of maternal warmth. "Come in, Milo is playing with blocks in the living room." I swallowed, awkwardly following her inside. On the living room carpet, a little fellow in dinosaur pajamas sat with his bottom in the air, intently building a castle. In that instant, looking at that small little back, my eyes instantly grew hot. It was a wondrous bond of blood that words could not describe. "Milo, look who's here," Stella called softly. The little one turned his head, and those eyes, almost identical to mine, were full of curiosity. I quickly crouched down, a little flustered, fumbling into the big box to pull out the latest Ultraman model, my voice trembling as I said, "Milo, hello, I am your dad." I had expected the child to be scared, to cry and fuss, maybe even to hide in Stella's arms. But strangely, Milo looked at me, blinked, and suddenly broke into a grin, showing a row of small white baby teeth. He waddled over on his short legs and leapt straight into my arms. "Daddy. Ultraman Daddy." His soft little body bumped solidly against me, and his chubby little hands clung tightly around my neck. In that moment, an unprecedented rush of contentment and happiness filled my chest. I held the squishy little guy close, tears almost spilling down. "Hey. Daddy's here, Milo, Daddy's here." Stella, standing to one side, watched the scene, quietly turned her face away, and wiped the tears from the corner of her eye. Blood is thicker than water, it is a miracle that nothing can interrupt. Ever since I was reunited with Milo, my life has been turned upside down. I no longer resisted going back to my parents' home. Whenever I had free time I would rush to Stella's villa. My relationship with Milo progressed at lightning speed. "Daddy, I want to ride the big horse." "All right, Milo, sit tight." Watching me crawl around the living room with my son on my back, Stella often laughed so hard her whole face lit up, completely losing her usual CEO composure. And in the process, the two of us adults came into contact more often, and our conversations gradually stretched from the child to each other's lives and work. I discovered that Stella was not only a ruthless, decisive woman in the marketplace, in private she was actually a little scatterbrained, fond of sweets, and even somewhat insecure, a charming woman. And she also thought that I, this seemingly serious lawyer, was actually a warm man with a bit of humor, extremely attentive, and a very good cook. A subtle, unusual feeling quietly took root between two lives that had once run in parallel. However, good times are always accompanied by storms. That day, I was teaching Milo to draw while Stella answered a phone call nearby. Her expression darkened in an instant. After she hung up, she rubbed her temples wearily. "What is it?" "Something happened at the company," I asked with concern. Stella glanced at me and sighed. "It's Faye. Recently she's been rallying some of the old board members on the joint board, trying to impeach me at next month's shareholders meeting, and she also seems to have gotten wind of some rumors about Milo's origins. She's planning to blow it up in the media and completely ruin both Milo's and my reputations." I frowned. 3 years ago this woman used the low, despicable trick of drugging people to frame Stella. 3 years on, she still had the nerve to stir up trouble, and now she even had the gall to set her sights on my son. As a top lawyer well-versed in criminal and civil litigation, my instinct to protect my own flared instantly. "Stella, about the hotel drugging 3 years ago, are you really going to let that go?" I looked at her, a cold, professional edge flashing through my gaze. Stella blinked. "Of course I don't want that. But the surveillance and evidence from back then were deleted by a hacker she hired. Relying only on a hacker's remittance record, it's hard to legally pin a crime on her." I scoffed, pushed up my glasses, and resumed the posture of that infallible star lawyer from the courtroom. A hacker can erase footage, but they can't erase people's consciences. Besides, the person who supplied her the aphrodisiac back then, the people who helped her in the hotel, can she really buy their silence for life? Wherever there's a crime, there will be traces. Leave it to me, this is my old specialty. I immediately put all my top contacts in the legal world and the private investigator circles into motion. As a lawyer, I knew exactly how to pry open the mouths of those involved. In less than half a month, with a combined offensive of my money and legal threats, I personally unearthed the drug dealer who had supplied Faye with illegal substances back then. Not only that, I followed the thread and found the former hotel lobby manager who had been bribed by Faye at the time to deliberately distract Stella's bodyguards. "Mr. Ethan, please don't prosecute me, I was foolish back then, Faye gave me $500,000. Facing the large stack of evidence I produced, enough to send him to prison for 10 years, the former manager completely broke down and signed his statement in tears. Holding that thick, airtight chain of evidence, I submitted it directly to the prosecutor's office and personally filed a public lawsuit against Faye as the plaintiff's representative lawyer. Not only that, I also conveniently collected all the evidence of Faye embezzling funds and siphoning company money from within the Shin Group over the past few years. 2 cases proceeded simultaneously. When the police placed handcuffs on Faye in the Shin Group's conference room, in front of all the board members, Faye went completely limp. "Stella. You framed me. You bitch." She screamed hysterically. I stepped forward, intercepted her from behind, looked down at Faye from above, and said coldly, "Miss Faye, I am Ethan, Miss Stella's legal counsel. You are suspected of intentional injury and illegal use of controlled substances 3 years ago, and in recent years of massive occupational embezzlement. We have submitted all the evidence to the court. What awaits you is more than 10 years in prison." Faye looked into my cold, merciless eyes and finally understood that this time she had hit a brick wall. Stella's father, upon learning the whole truth, seemed to age 10 years in an instant. He watched the illegitimate daughter he had raised so cruelly frame his own elder daughter, and then looked at Stella, who had borne everything alone for 3 years, his heart full of guilt and regret. "Stella, it's Dad who has wronged you, wronged the child." Stella's father drew up a will on the spot. All the shares and properties registered in his name would, after his death, be inherited entirely by Stella and Milo. As for Faye, he only left the bare monthly living allowance in the will, effectively severing ties completely and atoning for the mistakes he had made in the past. Thus, the greatest threat to Stella was, by my most thunderous and fully legal means, eradicated once and for all. With Faye arrested and the will settled, Stella could finally breathe a complete sigh of relief. And in the course of this, the relationship between the two of us had also undergone some quiet changes. "Ethan, this time, thank you so much." In Stella's villa, she looked at me, her eyes sparkling with a tenderness and adoration I had never seen before. "It's my honor to serve you and your son, no charge." I half-jokingly winked. Milo, munching an apple nearby, chimed in, "Dad's the best. Dad is Superman." Watching us like a warm little family of three, it felt to Stella as if a seed were breaking through the soil inside her. But at that moment, another time bomb exploded. It was the weekend, and since my parents were out of town, I had taken Milo to the park to fly a kite, with Stella by my side. Tired from playing, Milo was a bit thirsty, so Stella went to the nearby convenience store to buy water. Just then, my phone rang. "Bro. Where are you? I'm off today and came to your apartment to find you, and you're not there." Luna's voice came through the line, full of energy. "I'm flying a kite with the kids in Central Park," I replied casually. "Kids? What kids? Did you go on another blind date? Whose child are you with?" Luna fired off a string of questions. "All right, come over here. It's on the lawn by the south gate of the park." Half an hour later, Luna walked over in her sneakers, humming a tune. On the distant lawn I was crouched on the ground, dabbing the sweat from a little boy of just over 2. He was giggling, clinging to my neck and acting spoiled. Luna stepped forward, about to tease me, but when she saw the little boy's face clearly, she was struck as if by lightning. The milk tea in her hand hit the ground with a slap and spilled everywhere. Bro. Luna's trembling finger pointed at Milo, then at me. Her voice was as sharp as a cat with its tail stepped on. This kid, how is he exactly the same as your childhood photo? Did you go clone yourself somewhere?" Milo blinked at Luna and said in a babyish voice, "Pretty sister, I'm Milo." At that moment, Stella returned carrying water. "Luna, you're here." Luna turned her head stiffly, looking at her own aloof female CEO, then at the child who looked so much like my brother, and finally at my face, full of indulgent smiles. In that instant, Luna's brain cells completely fried. "Stella, my brother, this child, you." I sighed and walked over to pat her shoulder. "Luna, calm down. Let me introduce you, this is Milo, my biological son. This is your boss, and also your nephew's birth mother." "Ah." Luna let out a shrill scream that sent a flock of sparrows fluttering off the tree. "Bro. You actually gave us our president too." Luna clutched her chest, feeling faint. After half an hour of our popular science and explanations, Luna finally managed to digest this earth-shattering bombshell. "Heavens, that night 3 years ago, it was you." Luna slapped her thigh. "I knew it, no wonder the CEO suddenly got pregnant back then. It was you, you beast." "Luna, watch your words." "I'm a victim too, it was an accident," I corrected awkwardly. Luna was flushed with excitement, shedding all her usual assistant dignity. She threw her arms around Milo, kissing him again and again. "Oh my God, I have a nephew. And he's the CEO's. No way, we have to tell Mom and Dad and Grandpa right now. If they find out they'll literally jump for joy." "Hey. Luna, don't." Before I could stop her, Luna was already like a gust of wind. She dialed my mom's number while sprinting out of the park. "Mom. Great news. My brother has a son. He's 2.5. Yes. His own child. He looks exactly like my brother did as a child. Come back quick. Tell Grandpa to bring himself too." Watching Luna's retreating figure, Stella and I exchanged a look and helplessly rubbed our foreheads. Now the whole family really was going to be shaken to the core. Sure enough. My parents caught an overnight high-speed train and raced back as soon as they heard. Grandpa got so excited his blood pressure spiked and he was taken to the hospital, but luckily he was fine. The moment the whole family saw Milo in the VIP ward, my parents broke down holding the child and sobbed. "Oh my eldest grandson. He really looks just like your dad when he was little," my mother cried, her eyes rimmed red. Grandpa shakily stood up from his wheelchair, gripping Milo's little hand and repeating, Good. Ethan, in my life I can die without regret. Die without regret. Bah, Dad, what are you talking about? You still want to live to see your eldest grandson get married, my father corrected from the side. As for Stella, my family doted on her to the core. My mother practically forced the family's heirloom jade bangle onto her wrist, holding her hand and refusing to let go. Good child, you've suffered all these years. It's our Ethan's fault for being useless and letting you bear so much on your own. From now on, with us around, we will never let you suffer another bit of injustice. Stella felt the sincerity and warmth of the family and her eyes grew moist. She had fought through the cold battles of the Shen household for so many years and had never experienced such pure, selfless familial warmth. That, too, became the final catalyst between us. Over the following months, with Luna, my parents, and my son Milo giving full-throttle support, Stella and I made tremendous progress in our relationship. Dad, Mom worked overtime today and must be really tired. Could you make her favorite sweet and sour spare ribs? Milo blinked up at me. All right, Dad will go do that now. I smiled and ruffled his hair. Every time I cook, Stella watches me bustle around the kitchen in my apron, and the tenderness in her eyes nearly overflows. After these months together, she completely understands me. I'm not only a kind, responsible man, but also someone who knows her, protects her, and can be a warm harbor for her when she's weary. The year 2026, another beautiful summer night. I had booked the entire revolving restaurant on the top floor of the Hyatt for tonight. Brilliant starlight spilled against the huge floor-to-ceiling windows, and a violin melody floated through the air, lyrical and romantic. Stella wore a white evening gown, like that night years ago, but now with an added air of composure and happiness. Ethan, pulling out all the stops tonight, are you preparing a closing argument for some case? She said, smiling at me. I took a deep breath, reached into my suit pocket for an exquisite red velvet box, walked slowly to her, and dropped down on one knee. I looked into her beautiful, cool eyes, and in that moment my voice was both gentle and resolute. Stella. That night 3 years ago was an absurd accident. But I am endlessly grateful for it, because it brought Milo, and you, into my life. For the past 3 years you have borne too much alone. For the next 30, 50 years, I want to hold your hand, shelter you from wind and rain, and face everything together. Miss Stella, will you marry me, and let this unfit father of yours become your lawful husband? I opened the box to reveal a dazzling diamond ring, flashing with eternal light under the lamp. Stella looked at me, and tears finally fell. She nodded heavily. I will, I really will. From behind the folding screen, an untimely cheer suddenly broke out. Yeah. Mom said yes. Dad is awesome. Milo clapped his little hands and bounded out from behind the screen. Immediately after, Luna, my parents, and even Grandpa in his wheelchair all came out giggling. Bro, congrats on becoming official. Luna said smugly, winking at me. I laughed helplessly, stood up, and pulled both Stella and the leaping Milo tightly into my arms at once. Outside the window, the night sky was studded with stars and neon flickered. A reckless accident 3 years ago had twisted and turned along the edges of law and reason, and in the end, guided by love and responsibility, wrote the most perfect final chapter.